If you think about clowns, they are supposed to make you laugh until your stomach hurts. I agreed until I saw Tim Curry's amazing portrayal of Pennywise in the ABC miniseries, and since then, clowns have been a strict no-no for me. Back then, I had not read Stephen King's work, but let's just say that show did a number on me. Even as an adult, I still get freaked out by them, all thanks to that one character. But now that I have become more familiar with the lore behind Pennywise, I can honestly say that I am afraid of a lot more things than just a clown. Which is why I am shooting this during the daytime. When I was a kid, I had no idea that this scary guy wasn't really a clown at all. That was simply the form he preferred to take. He is something far more ancient, so much so that the whole clown makeup is an extremely dumbed-down version of the real horror he represents. Pennywise is a classic psychological predator who knows how minds work inside out, and that is the real catch here. Buckle up as I take you on a bumpy ride, breaking down every detail about him and how he hunts. I suggest keeping the lights on for this one. Is Pennywise even a clown? I get asked this a lot whenever I recommend it to people looking to venture into horror, and it is a reasonable assumption if you are just discovering Pennywise for the first time. I just tell them to keep reading more Stephen King because the thrill of knowing there is so much more happening behind that clown costume is just chilling in the most wonderful way possible, and that is a revelation people need to experience for themselves. This creature is actually a trans-dimensional cosmic entity known as It. The fictional town of Derry, Maine is his playground, and every 27 years he preys on its residents in the guise of a dancing clown. This is the form we are most used to seeing Pennywise take, but it is certainly not the only one. He can shapeshift and manipulate reality, among other things, so he can technically take the form of all kinds of other things too. For instance, in the novel he sometimes shapeshifts into Georgie, one of his first victims, and even the boy's rotting corpse. Pennywise is all about fueling fear in his victims, so he can pretty much take the form of anything straight out of their worst nightmares. This cosmic entity puts on his clown outfit because it works very well to lure kids, making it a more effective option. In the 2017 movie, when Georgie first meets Pennywise in the sewer, the latter has a markedly creepy appearance, of course, but he has a way of making the boy trust him by talking about balloons, peanuts, cotton candy, and popcorn. He is even asked what on earth he is doing in the sewer of all places, but even to that he gives a convincing response. Well, convincing enough for a little kid, that is. What's interesting is that he does not simply lay down the facts and ask Georgie to come with him. Instead, he engages the boy in conversation and gets him talking about his favorite snack, making the whole interaction seem like an offer that is simply too good to turn down. Think about it, a creature like him could have just grabbed Georgie the moment he peered down the sewer and called it a day. But instead he builds a sense of familiarity, gains the boy's trust, and then attacks. This is exactly why the clown getup works so well. He uses it to portray himself as someone goofy and non-threatening, like something you would see at a birthday party while enjoying a big slice of cake. King took the image of something we mostly associate with fun and laughter and turned it into one of the most enduring horror villains of all time. The dancing clown is simply one of the many performances this creature can pull off because it has been successful and effective, especially as he seems to have a particular liking for young children. What is behind that smile? There is a specific moment in the scene I just talked about that may get overlooked by many people, and it is meant to be a split-second thing anyway, but it is when you can clearly hear warning bells go off. No, I am not talking about the arm bite, just a few seconds before that. While Pennywise keeps talking to Georgie with pearly whites flashing, something in his expression changes. It is difficult to point out exactly what because his mouth is still curved up and you can see the crinkles in the corner of his eyes, but something looks very, very wrong. Okay, maybe the whole clown in a sewer thing itself is wrong, but remember, you and I are not the intended victims here. If we find someone stuck in a sewer, we will probably call the city administration or the fire department, like responsible adults. But for a little kid, that is the perfect bait. So throughout the time Georgie hesitates and says things like he is not supposed to talk to strangers, the clown does a really good job of convincing him that he is harmless. If we put aside the bigger context of the scene, it genuinely looks like this clown is stuck there and is just being friendly. All of that changes when a certain level of trust is established, which is good enough for Georgie to really laugh freely. And it is at this point that Pennywise realizes half the job is done. Still, he keeps up the performance even while his smile changes from warm to menacing, until that fateful moment when his jaw unhinges and he bites off Georgie's arm. There is no slow reveal or cinematic build-up before we see all those rows of teeth inside his mouth, and frankly, that is not needed either. I have to applaud Bill Skarsgård's expressions here, of course, because he really pulls off the friendly clown look really well before morphing his face into something out of a nightmare, just moments later. Many years after I had first watched the miniseries, I went down a rabbit hole to learn all I could about how the whole thing came together on screen. I remember that the special effects artist, Bart Mixon, had said that he purposely avoided making Pennywise look like a typical scary monster because 90% of the time he is suckering kids in. Before Tim Curry came on board, the storyboards featured exaggerated designs like big foreheads and sharp chins, but in the end they decided to let the actor do his job and convey the horror through his expressions. After all, to convince the children on screen that this character means no harm and is simply a friendly little clown, you also need the audience to believe the same thing. Arguably, Curry's Pennywise looks less creepy than Skarsgård's at first glance. Many people who watched the movie before the show have also said that Curry's Pennywise did not seem scary enough. But that's the thing, right? He is not supposed to be scary from the get-go, at least. The 2017 adaptation, directed by Andy Muschietti, deliberately featured a more sinister-looking clown, so that even when he would smile, he would feel uneasy enough to know that whatever is coming is not pretty. You have to remember that Tim Curry's portrayal was the first time we ever saw Pennywise on screen. It was meant to establish the character first, and it paved the way for all later adaptations. Whatever came after, it did not have to set up this clown as the bad guy, since that had been done already. This is why Muschietti took liberties in how he portrayed Pennywise, right from the creepier look to the 19th century costumes. Why does fear change his shape? Pennywise is not a creature with one scary face that everyone reacts to. If you and I were to encounter him, for instance, we would very likely not see the same thing. Every single kid in the Losers Club got a custom-designed monster when they encountered it individually, because it was built to mimic whatever they were scared of the most. Pennywise appeared in front of Ben as a headless child that was chasing him around, while Eddie saw a rotting leper coming from him. In front of Beverly, he took the form of a sink that kept spewing blood, and Stan saw a very disturbing painting of a woman come to life in front of him. Mike and Bill got the short ends of the sticks, if you ask me, because the creature took the forms of the people closest to them. While Mike relived the trauma of watching his parents get burned to death, Bill was plagued by a phantom of his dead younger brother. According to King, he was thinking of combining various kinds of monsters while working on his novel, to create something that would embody fear itself. He wanted to bring all the monsters one last time and call it It. I had this burning question in my mind for a long time as a kid because I kept wondering why this thing was not given a proper name and just called It. It makes sense now, though, because what it might appear to me as will be very different from whatever form it takes with another person. So the best way to identify it is using something so vague. In Stephen King's writings, Pennywise is compared to a talus, a Himalayan creature similar to a bogart, which manifests itself as the onlooker's worst fear. I think this is the part where Pennywise stops being just a child-eating clown and becomes something way more threatening. A demon jumping out in front of an unsuspecting person is scary because it factors in unpredictably and maybe some kind of suspense. But what if the entity is not trying to waste its time with jump scares? If something can read you well enough to know exactly what it is that you keep hidden in the deepest crevices of your mind, and chooses to show you that exact image, it is not just frightening. It almost feels like a violation of privacy that borders on abuse. Supernatural creatures are not bound by morality, so this is free territory for them to wander into. You can run away from a zombie charging towards you or a demon that has suddenly appeared right before you. We all have that primal instinct to flee from terror, but there are some very specific types of fear that our brains just do not know how to process, which is why people freeze. And this is exactly what Pennywise banks on. At first, he might appear all friendly and happy, like when he first said hello to Georgie. Soon enough, he will manifest as the scariest possible thing, just as he bit off the boy's arm and allowed him to think there was an escape route for a few seconds before stretching his arm out to drag the kid into the drain. You see how he used so many different emotions during such a small period of time? First, there was animosity and apprehension, which soon gave way to trust, and finally an unimaginable sense of fear as Georgie tried his best to escape the sewer even after losing his hand. I wonder what he saw after he was dragged inside, or if he even lived long enough to steal a glance at the thing that dragged him in. If yes, do you think he still saw a clown, or something far more terrifying? Are his forms real or illusionary? Now, if you ask me whether the headless boy that chased Ben was a real creature or just a figment of his imagination, I really do not think I have a definitive answer for you. Even the author has never clarified this, and I think that is entirely intentional on his part. Was the form Pennywise took for Mike scary because he watched his parents burn alive and relived his worst memories? Or was it scary because he thought his dead parents would come back and burn him as well? Since fear is a big part of this entity's MO, there genuinely cannot be a straight answer. What is scary to me might make absolutely zero sense to you, no matter how much I try to persuade you, right? What I can tell you is that if we strictly follow the novel and its adaptations, this particular question has been answered in both ways. In the 2017 film, we see how Stan is quite afraid of a weird painting from his father's office, which portrays a woman having a very long face and fingers. Pennywise manifests as this creepy woman from the painting and chases him away from the office and into the sewer, and even tries to eat his face before his friends finally come around and save him. So the form that he sees here is something uniquely frightening to him, but what happens to him and the wounds he sustains are very real. In the novel, Ben encounters it in the form of Dracula at the Derry Public Library. The vampire's mouth is filled with razor blades positioned at very odd angles, so whenever the creature speaks, chunks of its mouth and a lot of blood fall on top of the people reading below the staircase. Of course, this form does not try to directly attack Ben, and even all the blood falling from its mouth is seen and felt only by him, while the people around are blissfully oblivious. Dracula simply taunts him about the death of Stan while all this happens, so we can probably agree that this form was more of an illusion in the sense that the harm it tried to do was more psychological than physical. This ambiguity is actually explored very well in Stan's storyline, and just in case someone is new here, please note that this part will contain a really big spoiler. As a kid, when the losers were going through Mike's father's photo album, they were all seeing the images come alive, which was obviously Pennywise's doing. While all the kids were rattled by this, Stan was particularly afraid to the point where he just kept denying what he had seen, even when he was reassured by his friends that they had all experienced the same thing. In hindsight, this was probably foreshadowing that in the later years, Stan would be similarly frightened of confronting it once again, to the point where he would end his life rather than going through it again. In It Chapter 2, Stan reveals through his letters to the losers after his death that he was aware of his fear and believed that returning to Derry would only get in the way of dealing with the creature. This is why he chose to die, and by doing so he gave his friends a fighting chance to do what they had to do. This whole arc, from his denial to the lady from the painting chasing him, and eventually to his demise, shows that whether Pennywise took a real or illusionary form did not make the experience of facing it any less traumatic or devastating. This ambiguity is partly what makes the horror of it feel so personal to each of the losers. If they knew it was nothing but an illusion, they could reassure themselves that it could not cause them any real harm. If it always took on a physical form, at least there could have been some way to try and outsmart it. We have no way of knowing whether the form we are seeing is real or just a projection of our fears, and that it will not tear us apart. And this refusal to pick a lane and become a typical creature flick is why, my friends, I say that Stephen King is one of the greatest horror writers of all time. Why does he look like a spider? What can I say, arachnids have a special appeal when it comes to horror authors, so it might seem like nothing but a creative swing King decided on when he penned the finale. That is, however, not the case, because Pennywise's real form is not exactly that of a giant spider, or a giant pregnant spider to be more precise. In the novel, when the losers reach its lair, what they see is a massive mutated spider-like creature that has laid a bunch of eggs. Ultimately, they are also able to kill the spider by crushing its heart. So it sounds like a good enough true form reveal, right? As you can probably guess, this is not the case, because the book also mentions that when Bill was young, he performed the ritual of Chud to face Pennywise in the Macroverse. Here he came across its true form and where it came from. And even if he saw it for just a moment, it is enough of a hint that the spider mutation is not the ultimate form of this creature, but just an approximation of as much as the human mind can take of what it actually looks like. Bill described what he saw as an endless, hairy orange creature. Then does it mean that the spider form is just another costume it puts on, like the clown's? I will not say they are the same, because the dancing clown is something we can all see, and it is done on purpose by Pennywise to create a false sense of security and lure his victims. The spider look is not so much intentional. It is just the closest translation of what the human brain can comprehend when it is trying to make sense of something that does not even have a specific shape. By bringing the spider into this, the author is deliberately trying to tell us that this is the best your mind can do without blowing itself up, because looking directly at Pennywise's actual nature can overwhelm the human mind. The truth is basically something the human nervous system simply cannot process, so the spider-like mutation is the next best thing. The 1990 miniseries stays true to the novel in this context, but the 2019 movie takes a few liberties and portrays this form differently. Instead of a huge spider, what we see is more of a clown-spider hybrid. Obviously, this was intended to raise the ick factor and make it creepier, but I think it worked really well for the storytelling too. This hybrid form symbolized the fact that the spider was not the ultimate form of this entity, as it combined two forms. Its head and torso remained intact, while the rest of its body became an 8-legged arachnid with pincer-like claws. The spider in the show felt like a step down, of course, because seeing it as the final boss was a little anticlimactic after we had already been told the creature's real form was so terrifying that it was simply incomprehensible. Special effects have come a long way over the years, which is largely why we got a much better depiction of this hybrid in 2019. Remember how I also said this detail added to the narrative? Well, they defeat Pennywise's spider clown form by psychologically diminishing it and confronting their worst fears, causing the creature to become smaller over time. With every insult thrown at it, Pennywise morphs into a different form until he finally becomes what I feel is the ugliest and creepiest baby I have ever seen. It is then small enough to be killed, which the losers proceed to do. And this conclusion only makes sense if you realize that neither the spider nor the clown was ever the real or final form of this entity. No matter what shape Pennywise took, it was always the fear lurking behind it that did most of the heavy lifting. That is why, once the losers confronted what they were scared of, that factor no longer played a part, and they were able to finish it for good. What are the deadlights? The narrative is designed in such a way that no one can accurately explain what exactly the deadlights are. Many people have caught glimpses or shared secondhand accounts, but nobody has ever been able to articulate what it is they saw. That is the whole reason why deadlights are described as eldritch horrors that predate the birth of the universe as well. I am going to go over them in a concise manner, because this video will go on for hours if I go into the details. But in case you want me to cover deadlights separately, just write it in the comments. The first thing you should know is that the It novel is part of Stephen King's multiverse, and in the broader mythology surrounding the story, it is connected to the space between different worlds. Deadlights are bright orange in color, and as mentioned, they appear stringy, hairy, and endless. There is really no specific explanation given for their form beyond this in King's mythos. It is such a complex being that the spidery form I described just now is what the human mind comes closest to when rationalizing it. In Insomnia, another novel by the author, it is hinted that looking at the deadlights invites something that is worse than even death, and in case some poor soul is unfortunate enough to actually look at them, death is the kindest outcome they can expect. The words death and kindest in the same sentence sound poetic as well as horrifying at the same time. So I think you can guess where I'm going with this. In the Muschietti continuity, what we know as It or Pennywise is the physical manifestation or avatar of the deadlights. If someone does see the deadlights, they can go painfully insane or even fall into a coma because the human brain is simply not equipped to handle something that intense. This happens in the miniseries when Henry Bowers witnesses them and survives, but he goes completely insane, and his hair becomes pale white in color. In the 2017 film, Beverly falls into a coma after looking at the deadlights, and she hears children screaming and people begging for help while this happens. Fans have inferred that this means the deadlights do not just consume the bodies of the victims, but their souls as well. The deadlights also have a connection to the Crimson King, another major figure in Stephen King's Legendarium. The entity is therefore much more than a primary figure in it. It also appears across several other works by the author. With so much about the deadlights left open to interpretation, the best way to describe them is as purely Lovecraftian horror. Can Pennywise ignore anatomy? We just talked about how Pennywise is pretty much the manifestation of an ancient, malevolent cosmic entity that is so terrifying it just cannot be put into words. So it is not surprising that he can do things that do not just break the laws of physics, they pretty much invent new laws. The fridge scene at Neibolt House in the 2017 movie comes to my mind right away. When the creature slowly emerges from a crack in the old refrigeration in an upside-down fashion, limbs twisting and cracking into place, crawling like an insect, that is just pure nightmare fuel. It is a weird combination of body horror and psychological trauma, with the pacing kept deliberately slow to highlight just how much Pennywise was enjoying Eddie's fear. Do you know that Skarsgård performed the movements on set, but visual effects artists digitally replaced his body to create Pennywise's impossible contortions? I think that dedication made it even more nauseating to watch, especially because it shows that all of this is nothing but a game to Pennywise. He did not even change his form from a clown to anything for this scene. He just rearranged his body entirely to fit into an old fridge, and then carefully put himself together in front of a frightened child who was fully at his mercy. Then you have the even more disturbing bloody bathroom scene featuring Beverly, where thick, viscous blood spurts out of the sink in her washroom and coats everything in a shade of red, including the girl herself. Pennywise emerges from this deluge and mocks her with his pointed laughter, and this hits even harder when you realize Beverly's history of abuse at the hands of her father and her impending onset of womanhood. It is a very striking reference to the fact that she is growing older and is susceptible to a lot more and a lot worse than what Al Marsh has already put her through. So it is very evident that Pennywise can manipulate his anatomy in ways that a normal human body simply cannot. The clown looks like a human figure, but is just a convenient form for something that can even turn into a spider. He is not wearing or inhabiting a body, so to speak. His anatomy as Pennywise the Dancing Clown is itself a form he can manipulate in extraordinary ways, just as we do with an oversized jumper. Can Pennywise be hurt? Yes, he is a trans-dimensional entity older than the universe itself, and so terrifying to look at that your brain will turn into your great-aunt's Thanksgiving mashed potatoes if you directly encounter his real form. But that does not mean Pennywise is invincible. Andy Muschietti, during the promotion of It Chapter 2, said, "There is nothing that can kill Pennywise. The only weapon is believing, which is a weapon that actually Pennywise uses to kill his victims. So sheer physical force is not something you can use to beat him down, at least not by itself." Stephen King has stated that the only way to engage in a duel of sorts with it is to involve the ritual of Chud. Think of it as a psychic war of wits involving biting each other's tongues and speaking in riddles until one party laughs despite the obvious pain. Bill tried it when he was a kid and a second time when he was older, but he was not able to perform with the same zeal in the second case, because he did not have the same positive outlook and conviction he had as a child. And this helps explain how Pennywise can be defeated. He feeds on fear before he tastes his victim's flesh. The most reliable way to get rid of him is to stand firm in one's conviction, even in the face of hopelessness. Someone can get the upper hand in this game by facing their fears without losing hope and maintaining an optimistic outlook. In the novel, all the losers work together and stand united, drawing strength from their love for each other and cherished childhood memories, ultimately helping them to defeat it. It Chapter 2 slightly changes the ritual, making it easier for the audience to follow, since having the characters bite each other's tongues was not something the filmmakers could realistically translate to the big screen. In this movie, the losers realize that the only way to deal with Pennywise is to stand up to him and basically bully him until he shrinks down to a much smaller size. I know fans have mixed feelings about this, but I think it is much easier for a theater audience to digest than the intergalactic tongue-biting ritual mentioned in the novel. They repeatedly insult and mock Pennywise until both he and his power get diminished, but that is not the end. The psychological battle shrunk him down, allowing the losers to go for the final physical blow by destroying his heart. Why does the costume work? I know I touched upon this aspect a while back, but I want to go a little deeper into exactly why his clown costume is his default setting in the novel and its adaptations. When we think of Pennywise or It, we do not immediately associate him with the deadlights. The first image that pops in our heads is always that figure dressed as a clown with an unbelievably creepy smile and a menacing look in his eye. It is easy to simply term it as an example of the scary clown trope, but I think there is a lot more that went into his design. His outfit itself is quite different from the regular birthday party clowns that we are used to seeing, and this is highlighted particularly in the 2017 film. It features a distinct Victorian-era look because the director wanted to use a costume that, in a way, hints that this creature is very old and is therefore wearing outdated costumes. Even his clown makeup is similar to what you will find in circus performances, but there is just something deeply unnatural about it that you will not be able to point out. All clowns have white faces, red noses, and red lips, right? In Pennywise's case, however, even these common elements are skewed just to the right degree. A wider hairline, more prominent cheekbones, and a smile that sends chills down your spine. There is another quite glaring detail I do not think anyone can miss, and it is the overuse of the color red. When it comes to performances, you usually see a variety of colors, even in the costume of the performer, because that variety is meant to catch the eyes of young kids. With Pennywise, there is this almost uncomfortable insistence on using red in his makeup, parts of his outfit, and even the balloons you see him with. Don't get me wrong, I am not saying colors are inherently negative or anything, but given the context of this novel, red is certainly not a subtle choice. Tie all of this together and you have a figure that looks iffy enough for adults to pause and think before engaging. But kids lack the mental depth needed to grasp the gravity of these tiny details. So Pennywise is just another clown waiting to make them smile and send them home with candy and a few tricks to show off to their parents. Why are his eyes so unnatural? This scene was such an amazing way to introduce Pennywise. With Georgie peering into the sewer to find his paper boat, I expected to see a full reveal of Pennywise grasping his hand or something. Instead, the only thing that moved in that dark drain was a pair of eyes. And let me tell you, watching that in a theater is as exhilarating as it is frightening. Right at that second, it almost acts like a jump scare. Because why is someone even crouching beneath a sewer of all places? But the eyes do not immediately turn evil. His whole face appears gradually, and poor Georgie becomes another unfortunate victim. In this regard, I have to praise Bill Skarsgård yet again, because the way Pennywise's pupils pointed in different directions throughout the film was not CGI. It was something he did himself. Andy Muschietti said in an interview, "I told Bill, I want it in both directions. I want you to send your eyes looking away and give a really unsettling look." He said, "I can do it." So he did it. This effect was intended to make it look as if one of the creature's eyes was always transfixed on the screen at the audience. The actor might have done a stellar job, but he reportedly freaked even himself out by his portrayal, since he apparently experienced recurring dreams about the character he played for almost 2 weeks after filming it wrapped up. Another minute detail, if you remember, is that something very strange happens in this opening scene, which acts as a catalyst for Georgie's untimely death. When we first see Pennywise, his eyes are a striking shade of yellow, before quickly turning blue when he initiates a conversation with the boy. The movie does not really go into any depth regarding this, but there is an explanation in the novel. There, Georgie is quoted as saying that he was scared of the monster he thought was hiding in their basement, and always imagined it to have yellow eyes. So when he encounters the clown for the first time, all he can see are yellow eyes. Later, however, he thinks he was mistaken because the clown's eyes look blue in color. And not just any blue, the same shade as his mother and brother's eyes. Was this something purely from Georgie's perspective as he started trusting the clown? Or was this purposely done by Pennywise himself because he wanted to lure the boy into the drain? Why does Pennywise hurt children? Children are not incidental victims in it and its adaptations. While Pennywise does not say no to adults, he seems to have a particular preference for kids, which logically does not make a lot of sense. If it was about hunger, then an adult's body would keep him satisfied for much longer, right? So it definitely is not about feeling full. Then is it because clowns are typically attractions children enjoy more than adults, so the author used that connection? Maybe, but that also cannot be the full reason. When talking about It, Welcome to Derry, Muschietti gave a pretty well-rounded answer to this question. He said, "It acts in mysterious ways. Very often he appears only to his victim as their worst fear, and then when the victim is scared enough, he will eat them. Why does it target kids? mainly because kids are the most capable of believing in things that don't exist. Children are far more likely to believe in the supernatural than adults are, of course. And when someone believes something, they can also fear that same thing. Kids are also weaker and far less resilient than adults. If something bites my arm off, I am not going to roll around and wait for it to bite off more. I will do my best to bolt off in the opposite direction. A young child is not physically capable of that, so even when they try to escape, Pennywise will hardly have to lift a finger to drag them right back. It is easier to manipulate them into thinking that their worst fear is in front of them, because unlike adults, they do not know how to rationalize their thoughts. If I am afraid of something and I see that very object before my eyes, I will absolutely be scared, but I will also question whether that thing is really out there or I am just being delusional. Children do not have that capacity, and since they are surrounded by books and stories about monsters and demons, they can be frightened to a much greater degree than adults. We even have Pennywise saying how fear salts the flesh, so he just prefers his victims to be so infinitely scared that he can savor devouring not just them, but also their emotions. Think about it. If a child comes up to you and says a monster lives under their bed, you will probably dismiss it as some kind of nightmare. But if an adult says the same thing, you are far more likely to take it seriously, because we are not driven by entirely primal fears. We have taxes and inflation and other grown-up things to be worried about after all. What does the 27-year cycle mean? So what is this deal with Pennywise hibernating and then waking up to contribute to the death rate of Derry every 27 years? First things first, this creature is not hibernating in the same manner that bears do during the winter season. Stephen King has given us a fixed pattern that follows Pennywise's feeding cycles, but he has never really described the rest period as hibernation. It is just something we have assumed it does when it is not actively hunting kids. Honestly, we do not know why it goes inactive for that long and then wreaks havoc for 12 to 16 months before disappearing again. It has been left to our interpretation. As someone who hates open-ended things, I admit that this gap makes me a little mad. But this is a cosmic entity we are talking about. Would it not be weird if we said we have no idea what this thing looks like for real, and then somehow have all the details about how it operates? When Mike talks about it, he tells his friends that the creature sleeps for 25 to 27 years, and then wakes up to create absolute chaos before going back to sleep. He remains the only member of the losers to stay back in town as an adult, and thus is the only one to retain all the memories from his childhood. When he calls his friends back to defeat Pennywise for good, it is because he had been keeping a watchful eye over Derry all that time, and is certain that what he witnessed as a kid is about to happen again, even though he cannot explain why. Pennywise, however, seems to use this hibernation period to his advantage, because it allows him to remain unnoticed by the people of the town, who have nearly accepted that Derry is cursed by something that shows up every few years and cannot possibly be stopped. It is not just the disappearance of children that happens whenever the clown decides to wake up. Other catastrophic incidents like murders and fires are all timed almost perfectly with this 27-year cycle. It is possible that for an entity like him, that period is nothing more than a few months, in case he perceives time differently than humans do. If that is true, then he is just taking a nap before his next feeding session. A lot of fans also talk about how 27 years has a specific symbolic importance, because it is long enough for the generation of children from the earlier cycle to grow up and forget all about their childhood fears. So this ensures that a new generation of kids is available for him to prey on whenever he returns, and these children have no idea that something so evil lurks beneath their city. It could also be a deliberate trick by the creature to give the people of the town a false sense of security after unleashing many horrors at a stretch. Just when the residents begin believing everything is fine, Pennywise returns, shattering that illusion and feeding on their collective paranoia as well. Once again, the author has never confirmed anything about this gap, so these ideas come from fan forums and my own interpretation. If you have a different theory, please let me know in the comments below. I think one of the main reasons why Pennywise has stuck around in people's minds way longer than many other horror icons is because of the intentional gaps in his story. With every rewatch or reread, I am sure we discover something new, but it still does not get us anywhere close to answering some of the more burning questions I have brought up here. All I can say is that he is here to stay and give the clown community a bad rep. If you want to dig through Stephen King's mythos one thread at a time, make sure to hit the subscribe button. There is a lot more to explore in Derry and beyond it too.